The storm had passed 3 days ago, but the field still smelled of soaked earth and bent stalks when Garrett Northam saw the new worker outpace his strongest man before the sun had fully risen. He stood on the farmhouse porch, coffee cooling in his hand, watching the crew spread across the wheat field to assess the damage. Wind had flattened a quarter of the crop, and every stalk lying flat would need to be bundled by hand before the grain rotted. Hard work, slow work. The kind that broke spirits before it broke backs. The orc woman moved through the rows like she was angry at the wheat itself. Her green skin caught the early light as she bent, gathered, tied, and moved again in a rhythm that never paused. Tom, his foreman, was a bull of a man who could work from dawn until the stars came out, but even he stopped to wipe his brow and adjust his grip. The orc woman never stopped. Garrett set his coffee on the porch rail and descended the steps, boots squelching in the mud. "Morning, boss," Tom called when Garrett reached the field's edge. "Storm did a number on this section. We'll be at it all week." "Looks that way." Garrett watched the orc woman for another moment. She had moved 10 yards further down her row than anyone else. "Who's that?" "New hand. Kora Ravisk. Came through yesterday afternoon looking for work." Tom scratched his beard. "Strong as an ox, quiet, doesn't complain. Figure we can use the help with harvest coming." "You hired her on the spot." Seemed smart. "She's doing the work of 2 men. Garrett nodded slowly. Tom was right about that much. But there was something in the way she moved, a barely controlled ferocity in every motion that made him uneasy. Not afraid, just uneasy. He crossed into the field, his own boots pressing down the muddy gaps between rows. As he got closer, he could see her more clearly. She was not the massive warrior type some orcs grew into. She stood maybe 5.5 feet, built lean and strong like a farmhand should be, with her black hair pulled back in a braid that hung to her shoulders. Her tusks were small, barely visible unless she opened her mouth, and her pointed ears twitched slightly as he approached. "Miss Ravisk." She did not look up. Her hands kept moving, gathering the wheat with a speed that should have been reckless but was instead perfectly controlled. "Sir." "Tom says you started yesterday." "Yes, sir. You worked through the evening, until dark." "Yes, sir." Garrett crouched beside her row, pretending to examine the bundled wheat. It was good work. Clean ties, even sheaves. "You can call me Garrett, or Mr. Northam if you prefer." "Sir makes me feel like I should be wearing a uniform." That got a flicker of reaction. Her hands paused for half a breath, and her dark eyes cut toward him before returning to the wheat. "Mr. Northam, then." "Fair enough." He stood, brushing dirt from his knees. "There's water and bread set out by the equipment shed. Make sure you take breaks when you need them." "I am fine." That was not a suggestion. Her jaw tightened, and for a moment he thought she might argue. Then she nodded once, sharply, and returned to her work. Garrett walked back toward the farmhouse, but he did not go inside. Instead, he moved to the barn and began his own work, mucking stalls and checking the animals. The farm had 60 acres under cultivation, another 20 in pasture, and livestock that needed tending no matter how tired a man got. Since Margaret died 2 years ago, he had thrown himself into every task with the same single-minded determination he now saw in Kora Ravisk. The thought stopped him mid-swing with the pitchfork. He leaned on the tool and stared out the barn door at the distant figures in the field. The realization settled in his chest like a stone in still water. She was not just working hard. She was running from something. He knew because he had been doing the same thing for 24 months. By midday, the sun had burned off the last of the clouds and turned the fields into a humid oven. Garrett brought water out himself, carrying 2 buckets and a ladle. The men gathered around gratefully, splashing their faces and necks. Kora was 50 yards further down her row. "Kora," Garrett called. "Water." She straightened slowly, one hand pressed briefly to the small of her back, then walked over. Her shirt was soaked through with sweat, and her breathing was heavier than it should have been. "Drink," Garrett said, offering the ladle. She drank 3 full ladles without stopping, water running down her chin. When she finished, she wiped her mouth with the back of her hand and started to turn away. "How much are you sending home?" Garrett asked quietly. She froze. For a long moment, the only sound was the distant caw of crows over the field. "I do not know what you mean," she said finally. "Most workers keep a quarter of their wages for themselves. Food, clothes, maybe a drink on rest day. You are working like someone who needs every copper." "That is my business." "It is. But this is my farm, and if you collapse from exhaustion, that becomes my business too." Her hands curled into fists at her sides. "I will not collapse, Kora." He waited until she looked at him. "I am not trying to pry. I am trying to understand what I am seeing. You are a good worker, maybe the best I have ever hired, but you are pushing yourself past sense, and I need to know if there is a reason I should be worried." She stared at him for a long time. Her dark eyes were hard, measuring him. Then, slowly, the hardness cracked. "My brother," she said quietly. "He is in a labor contract, debt bonded. I am buying him out." The words landed like hammer blows. Debt bondage was legal in the Northern Territories, technically, but it was a cruel practice that trapped people in servitude for years, sometimes generations. "How much does he owe?" Garrett asked. 200 silver. She said it flatly, like reading a sentence. "I have paid 43 so far. Every month I send 10, sometimes 12 if I can." Garrett did the math in his head. At that rate, it would take her more than a year. Closer to 2 if she had to eat and keep herself clothed. "How old is your brother?" 13. The stone in his chest grew heavier. "What kind of work?" "Stone quarry. He carries water and hauls gravel." Her voice stayed flat, but her hands were shaking. "He is small. He was sick last winter. I need to get him out before." She did not finish the sentence. She did not have to. "Come on," Garrett said. "Let us get some food in you." "I have not finished my row." "The row will be there after lunch. Come on." He turned and walked toward the farmhouse without checking if she followed. After a moment, he heard her boots in the mud behind him. The house was cool and dim after the bright heat of the field. Garrett had kept it clean, more or less, but it had the empty feeling of a place where only one person lived. The kitchen table was scarred oak, large enough for 6 but set for 1. He pulled out a chair. "Sit." Kora sat, her posture stiff and uncomfortable. Garrett moved to the pantry and pulled out bread, cheese, dried meat, and a jar of pickled vegetables Margaret had put up 3 summers ago. He set it all on the table along with 2 plates and a knife. "Eat what you want," he said, sitting across from her. She looked at the food like it might vanish if she reached for it. Then, carefully, she cut a slice of bread and a piece of cheese. Garrett made himself a plate and ate in silence, watching her from the corner of his eye. She ate slowly, methodically, like someone who had learned not to draw attention to hunger. "My wife died 2 years ago," he said abruptly. Kora looked up, startled. "Fever," Garrett continued. "Came on fast. She was gone in 4 days. He stared down at his plate. "After that, I did not know what to do with myself, so I worked, dawn to dusk every day. Thought if I stayed busy enough, I would not have to think about the fact that she was not here anymore." He looked up and met Kora's eyes. "I am not saying our situations are the same," he said. "But I know what it looks like when someone is using work to outrun pain. And I am telling you, it does not work. All it does is wear you down until there is nothing left." Kora set down her bread. Her hands were still shaking. "What else am I supposed to do?" she whispered. "He is my brother. I am all he has. If I do not get him out, no one will. I know." "Then what do you want me to do? Work less, send less. Let him stay there longer. I want you to let someone help." She laughed, a bitter sound. "Who, you, maybe." The word hung in the air between them. Kora shook her head slowly. "You do not even know me. I know you are trying to save your brother. I know you are working yourself to death to do it. That is enough. Why?" Her voice was raw now, all the flatness burned away. "Why would you help me? I am just another field hand, just another orc." Garrett leaned back in his chair, considering his words carefully. "When Margaret died, people helped me. Neighbors brought food. Tom ran the farm for 2 weeks while I sat in this house and stared at walls. I did not ask for it. I did not deserve it. They just did it because it was the right thing to do." He met her eyes again. "Maybe I am just trying to pass that forward." Kora looked down at her plate. A single tear ran down her cheek and dripped onto the table. She wiped it away quickly, almost angrily. "I cannot pay you back," she said. "I am not asking you to." "Then what do you want?" "I want you to keep working at a reasonable pace. I want you to eat proper meals. And I want you to trust that we will figure this out together." She stared at him for a long moment, searching his face for something. Finally, she nodded. "Okay," she said quietly. "Okay." They finished the meal in silence, but it was a different kind of silence. Less empty. That evening, after the crew had gone home and the sun was setting red and gold over the western hills, Garrett sat at his desk in the small room off the kitchen that served as his office. The farm's ledgers were spread before him, along with a separate sheet where he had been running numbers. The farm was doing well. The harvest would be strong if the weather held. He had money saved, enough to see him through a bad winter or a failed crop, enough to help, but 200 silver was not a small sum. Even if he paid off the entire debt, it would drain most of his savings. And there was no guarantee that whoever held the contract would even accept payment from a third party. He rubbed his eyes and looked at the small portrait on the edge of his desk. Margaret, painted 5 years ago on their 10th anniversary. She was smiling, her hair catching the light. "What would you do?" he asked the portrait. The portrait, predictably, did not answer, but he thought he knew anyway. Margaret had been practical, yes, but she had also been kind. She would have told him to do what he thought was right and damn the consequences. He pulled a fresh sheet of paper toward him and began drafting a letter. Over the next 2 weeks, Garrett watched Kora carefully. She still worked harder than anyone else, but she took breaks now. She ate meals with the crew instead of skipping them, and slowly, carefully, she began to talk. Not much at first, just small things, comments about the weather, questions about the best way to stake tomatoes, little observations that revealed a sharp mind and a careful eye. Garrett found himself seeking out those conversations. He would bring water to the fields himself, or find an excuse to work near wherever she was assigned. They talked about farming, about the borderlands, about the small details of life that fill the spaces between hard work and sleep. He learned that she had been raising her brother since their parents died 4 years ago, that she had worked a dozen different jobs, moving from farm to farm, always looking for better wages, that she loved thunderstorms and hated early mornings and could identify birds by their calls. She learned that he had inherited the farm from his father, that he had met Margaret at a harvest dance and known within a week that he wanted to marry her, that he still set 2 places at the table sometimes before remembering. They did not talk about her brother's debt or about Garrett's offer to help. It hung between them, unspoken but present, like the promise of rain on the horizon. 3 weeks after Kora arrived, a letter came back. Garrett opened it in his office, his heart hammering against his ribs. He scanned the contents once, then again to be sure he understood. The contract holder was a man named Silas Crew, who operated a quarry outside the town of Millbrook, 2 days' ride north. He confirmed that Kora's brother, whose name was listed as Brennan Ravisk, was currently in his employ under a debt bond of 200 silver. He would accept payment in full from any party, but only in person and only in coin, no promissory notes. Once paid, the contract would be dissolved and the boy released. Garrett set the letter down and stared at it. 200 silver. 2 days' ride. Payment in person. He could do this. He wanted to do this. But first, he needed to tell Kora. He found her in the vegetable garden, weeding between the rows of beans. The afternoon sun turned her green skin to jade, and her braids swung as she worked. "Kora," she looked up, wiping dirt from her hands. "Mr. Northam, I need to talk to you. Can you come to the house?" Something in his tone made her pause. Then she nodded and followed him across the yard. In the kitchen, he poured 2 glasses of water and handed her one. Then he pulled the letter from his pocket and set it on the table. "I wrote to the man who holds your brother's contract," he said. Kora went very still. "You did what?" I asked about the terms for buying out the debt. He responded. Garrett tapped the letter. 200 silver, paid in person in Millbrook. Once it is paid, your brother is free. She stared at the letter like it might bite her. "Why would you do that?" "Because you needed help and I could offer it. I did not ask you to, I know." She picked up the letter with shaking hands and read it slowly. When she finished, she set it down very carefully and looked at him. "I cannot pay you back," she said again. "I know." "Then why?" Garrett took a breath. He had been asking himself the same question for 3 weeks, and he thought he finally had an answer. "Because I have been half alive for 2 years," he said quietly, "going through the motions, working until I was too tired to think. And then you showed up, doing the exact same thing for a completely different reason, and I realized how much I hated seeing someone else trapped in that same empty cycle. So maybe I am doing this for you, or maybe I am doing it for me. I do not know anymore. But I know I want to help and I have the means to do it, so let me." Kora's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "You are a strange man, Garrett Northam." He huffed a soft laugh. "I have been called worse." She looked down at the letter again. "When would we go?" "We." "You think I am going to let you ride 2 days to hand over 200 silver without being there?" She met his eyes, fierce now. "He is my brother." Garrett smiled. "Then we leave in 2 days. I need to make arrangements for the farm." She nodded, then stood and walked around the table. Before Garrett could react, she pulled him into a tight hug. "Thank you," she whispered. He hugged her back, feeling the tremor in her shoulders. "You are welcome." The 2 days before they left passed in a blur of preparation. Garrett arranged for Tom to oversee the farm in his absence, made sure the accounts were in order, and packed supplies for the journey. Kora seemed unable to sit still, moving from task to task with barely controlled energy. On the morning of their departure, Garrett saddled 2 horses and loaded the saddlebags with food, water, and a heavy leather pouch containing 200 silver coins. The weight of it was significant, both physically and in what it represented. Kora met him at the stable, dressed in clean traveling clothes. She looked nervous and excited and terrified all at once. "Ready?" Garrett asked. "Yes." They mounted and rode out as the sun broke over the eastern hills, painting the fields in shades of amber and gold. The road north was well traveled, cutting through farmland and small villages. They rode in silence for the first hour, both lost in their own thoughts. It was Kora who finally spoke. "What if something goes wrong?" she asked quietly. "Like what?" "What if this Seela's crew will not take the money? What if he wants more? What if Brennan is?" She trailed off, unable to finish. Garrett guided his horse closer so they were riding side by side. "Then we deal with it, together." She looked at him, and some of the fear in her eyes eased. Together. They rode on. The journey took them through changing landscape, from the flat farmland around Garrett's property into rolling hills dotted with sheep and cattle. They passed through villages where people stared at Kora with suspicion or outright hostility, and Garrett made sure to stay close, his presence a silent statement of protection. On the first night, they camped by a stream under a ceiling of stars. Garrett built a fire while Kora tended to the horses, and they ate a simple meal of bread and dried meat. "Tell me about him," Garrett said as they sat by the fire. "Your brother." Kora stared into the flames, a small smile touching her lips. "He is stubborn, always has been. When our parents died, he wanted to take care of me, even though he was only 9. He tried to find work, tried to help." She shook her head. "I told him he needed to focus on growing up, not growing old before his time, but he did not listen." "Sounds familiar," Garrett said. She glanced at him. "What do you mean?" "You are doing the same thing. Taking care of someone, working yourself to the bone, not letting anyone help." Kora was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Our father used to say that family is the only thing that matters, that everything else is just noise." After he and Mother died, I tried to keep that idea alive for Brennan. Tried to be everything he needed, but I failed. You did not fail. You are here, are you not? Riding to get him back, with your money, with my help. There is a difference." Garrett poked at the fire with a stick. "Family is important, but so is knowing when to let other people in. Margaret taught me that. She used to say that love is not just about holding on. It is also about opening your hands and letting people choose to stay." Kora looked at him across the fire. "She sounds like she was wise." She was. "Too wise for someone like me, probably." "I doubt that." They sat in comfortable silence after that, listening to the crackle of the fire and the soft sounds of the night. Eventually, Kora lay down and wrapped herself in her blanket, and Garrett did the same on the opposite side of the fire. Just before he fell asleep, he heard her voice, soft and uncertain. "Garrett?" "Yes, thank you for all of this. You already thanked me, I know, but I wanted to say it again." He smiled in the darkness. "You are welcome. Again." The second day of travel brought them into rougher country. The hills grew steeper, and the road narrowed to little more than a track carved into the side of the slope. They saw fewer travelers, and the villages they passed were smaller and more isolated. By late afternoon, they crested a ridge and looked down into a narrow valley. At its center, carved into the hillside like a wound, was the quarry. Kora reined in her horse, staring down at it. From this distance, they could see tiny figures moving among the piles of stone, and the faint sound of hammers on rock drifted up on the wind. "That is it," she said. Her voice was tight. "Then let us finish this." They rode down into the valley as the sun began its descent toward the western horizon. The quarry was larger up close, a sprawling operation with multiple pits and a cluster of rough buildings that served as offices and housing. Men moved among the stone like ants, their faces gray with dust. Garrett and Kora dismounted near the largest building, which had a sign over the door that read "Office." Garrett took the pouch of silver from his saddlebag and tied it to his belt, feeling its weight settle against his hip. "Stay close," he said quietly. Kora nodded, her face set. They pushed open the door and stepped into a dim room that smelled of sweat and stone dust. A man sat behind a desk, writing in a ledger. He was thick-bodied and balding, with the kind of face that looked mean even in repose. "Help you?" he asked without looking up. "I am looking for Sela's crew," Garrett said. "You found him." Crew set down his pen and looked up. His eyes flicked from Garrett to Kora, and his expression hardened. "What do you want?" "I am here to settle a debt." "Brennan Ravisk." Crew leaned back in his chair, studying them. "You the orc girl who has been sending money?" "I am his sister," Kora said, her voice steady. "Figured." Crew opened a different ledger and flipped through pages. "Brennan Ravisk, 200 silver owed minus." He ran his finger down a column. 43 already paid. Leaves 157. The letter said 200, Garrett said. Letter was written 3 weeks ago. She has paid another installment since then. Crew looked up. You got 157 in silver, the boy walks. You do not. Stop wasting my time. Garrett untied the pouch and set it on the desk with a heavy thunk. Count it. Crew's eyebrows went up, but he pulled the pouch over and began counting coins. It took several minutes, during which the only sound was the clink of silver on wood. Finally, he nodded. 157 silver. Contract is paid. He stood and walked to a filing cabinet, pulling out a sheet of paper. He scrawled something at the bottom and signed it with a flourish. There. Debt dissolved. Boy is free to go. Where is he? Kora asked. Workers' quarters, probably. Third building down. Crew sat back down and waved them away. Get him out of here before dinner. I do not run a charity. Garrett and Kora left the office and walked quickly toward the workers' quarters, a long, low building with narrow windows. Inside, it was crowded and hot, with bunks lining both walls and men sprawled on them in various states of exhaustion. Brennan, Kora called. A figure stirred in the far corner and sat up. He was small and thin, with the same green skin and dark hair as Kora, and when he saw her, his face went through a series of expressions too fast to follow. Shock, disbelief, hope. Kora. His voice cracked. She crossed the room in 3 strides and pulled him into a crushing hug. He clung to her, his shoulders shaking, and Garrett looked away to give them a moment of privacy. When he looked back, Kora was holding her brother at arm's length, examining him. Are you hurt? Are you eating enough? Have they been treating you well? I am fine, Brennan said, laughing and crying at the same time. What are you doing here? How did you? He trailed off as he noticed Garrett standing near the door. This is Garrett Northam, Kora said. He helped me buy out your contract. Brennan stared at Garrett with wide eyes. You did, we did, Garrett said. Together. Now get your things. We are leaving. Brennan grabbed a small bundle from under his bunk, everything he owned in the world, and followed them out. As they walked back to the horses, he kept looking at Kora like he was afraid she might disappear. I thought it would take years, he said quietly. I thought I would be here until I was grown. Not anymore, Kora said fiercely. You are coming home with me. They mounted up, Brennan riding double with Kora, and left the quarry behind as the sun touched the horizon. None of them looked back. That night, they camped in a clearing a few miles from the quarry. Brennan could not stop talking, a flood of words about the quarry and the work and the other boys he had met. Kora listened with an expression of fierce joy, and Garrett built up the fire and let them have their reunion. Eventually, Brennan's words slowed and he curled up next to his sister, exhausted. Kora stroked his hair absently, staring into the flames. I cannot believe he is really here, she said quietly. Believe it, Garrett said. She looked at him across the fire. I do not know how to repay you. You keep saying that, because it is true. Garrett considered his words carefully. There is something you could do if you want to, anything. Stay, Kora blinked. What? Stay at the farm, not as a worker, as a partner. I have been running the place alone for 2 years and I am tired of it. I could use help. Real help from someone who knows the work and cares about it. He paused. And I could use the company. Kora was very still. You want me to stay, I want you to stay, both of you. There is plenty of room in the house. Brennan can go to the village school. You can help run the farm or do whatever you want. I am not trying to put you in another contract. I am just offering you a place, a home if you want it. She stared at him, her eyes searching his face. Why? Because somewhere between you showing up angry at the wheat and now, I started caring about what happens to you, and to him. Garrett glanced at the sleeping boy. Because I think we make a good team, and because I am tired of being alone. Kora looked down at her brother, then back at Garrett. What if I am a terrible partner? What if I make mistakes? Then we fix them, together. She smiled, a real smile that lit up her whole face. Together. Is that a yes? That is a yes. They rode back to the farm over the next 2 days, taking their time. Brennan marveled at everything, asking questions about the countryside and the villages and the farm. Garrett answered patiently, and Kora watched them both with an expression of cautious happiness, like she was afraid to believe this was real. When they finally rode up the lane to the farmhouse, the sun was setting and the fields were golden in the light. Tom and a few of the other workers were finishing up for the day, and they looked up in surprise as the 3 riders approached. "Boss," Tom called. "You are back. Who is the kid?" "This is Brennan," Garrett said. "Kora's brother. He is going to be staying with us." Tom grinned. "Good to meet you, Brennan. You know how to work." Brennan straightened in the saddle. "Yes, sir." "Then you will fit right in." They dismounted, and Garrett led them into the house. It felt different now, less empty. He showed Brennan to one of the spare bedrooms upstairs, and the boy's eyes went wide at the sight of a real bed with clean sheets. "This is for me?" he asked. "It is yours," Garrett said. "Get cleaned up and come down for dinner." Brennan nodded and disappeared into the room, closing the door behind him. Garrett found Kora standing in the kitchen, looking around like she was seeing it for the first time. "Strange, is it not?" she said quietly. "A few weeks ago I was just another worker. Now I am here, in your house. About to have dinner like this is normal." "It is normal," Garrett said, "or it will be." She looked at him. "I am still not sure why you are doing this." "Because I want to." "Is that not enough?" She crossed the room and took his hand. Her palm was rough with calluses, warm and solid. "It is enough, more than enough." They stood there for a moment, hands linked, and something passed between them, an understanding, a promise. Then Brennan thundered down the stairs, and the moment broke into laughter. The next week settled into a new rhythm. Kora worked alongside Garrett, managing the farm with an efficiency that impressed even Tom. Brennan threw himself into his chores with the same fierce determination as his sister. And slowly, the farmhouse began to feel like a home again. Garrett found himself looking for excuses to work near Kora. They talked as they worked about everything and nothing, and he realized he was enjoying himself in a way he had not since Margaret died. Kora had a dry sense of humor that caught him off guard, and a fierce intelligence that made even mundane conversations interesting. One evening, they were sitting on the porch after dinner, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. Brennan was inside, ostensibly doing lessons but probably drawing in the margins of his books. "Can I ask you something?" Kora said. "Of course." "You still miss her?" "Your wife?" Garrett was quiet for a moment. "Every day, but it is different now. It does not hurt the way it used to." "What changed? You," he said simply. "You and Brennan. You reminded me that there is still life worth living, still things worth caring about." Kora looked at him, and in the fading light her eyes were soft. "I care about you too, you know, more than I probably should." Garrett's heart skipped. "What does that mean?" "It means I think about you when I should be thinking about work. It means I find excuses to be near you. It means I am terrified and hopeful at the same time." She took a breath. "It means I am falling in love with you, Garrett Northam, and I do not know what to do about it." Garrett reached out and took her hand. "You could start by letting me tell you that I am falling in love with you too." She stared at him, her mouth slightly open. "You are, I am, have been for a while, I think. I was just too stubborn or too scared to admit it." She laughed, a breathless sound. "We are a pair, are we not? Both stubborn, both scared. Maybe that is why it works." She leaned closer, and he met her halfway, and when their lips touched, it was soft and tentative and full of promise. When they pulled apart, they were both smiling. "So what happens now?" Kora asked. Now we figure it out together. I like the sound of that." They sat on the porch until the stars came out, hands linked, talking about everything and nothing. Inside, Brennan peeked through the window, grinned, and went back to his drawings. The harvest came, and it was the best Garrett had seen in years. The crew worked from dawn to dusk, and Kora and Garrett worked right alongside them, directing and hauling and laughing. Brennan helped where he could, and in the evenings they all gathered around the big kitchen table for meals that were loud and chaotic and full of life. Tom pulled Garrett aside one day as they were loading wagons. "Boss, I've got to say you seem different." "Different how?" "Happier. Like you finally came back from wherever you have been the last 2 years." Garrett looked across the field to where Kora was directing the placement of sheaves, Brennan at her side. "I suppose I have. She is good for you. Both of them are, I know." Tom clapped him on the shoulder. "Good, do not mess it up," Garrett laughed. "I will do my best." As the harvest drew to a close, Garrett realized he needed to make a decision. He and Kora had been dancing around the question of their future for weeks, but it was time to be direct. One evening, after Brennan had gone to bed, he asked Kora to walk with him. They strolled through the fields, now empty and quiet after the frantic work of harvest, under a sky full of stars. "I have been thinking," Garrett said. "Dangerous," Kora teased. "Probably." He stopped and turned to face her. "Kora, these last few months have been the best I have had in a long time, maybe ever. You and Brennan have brought this place back to life. You have brought me back to life." She took his hands. "You did the same for us. You gave us a home, a future. I want that future to be together." "Officially." He took a breath. "Kora Ravisk, will you marry me?" She stared at him, her eyes wide and shining in the starlight. "Marry you?" "Yes. I know it might be fast, and I know there will be people who do not approve, but I do not care. I love you. I want to build a life with you. I want to wake up next to you every morning and work beside you every day and fall asleep with you every night. So what do you say?" Kora was crying now, tears streaming down her face, but she was smiling. "Yes. Yes, of course, yes." He pulled her into a kiss, and she wrapped her arms around him, laughing and crying at the same time. When they finally pulled apart, they were both grinning like fools. "We should tell Brennan," Kora said, "in the morning. Right now, I just want to be here with you." They stood in the middle of the field, holding each other under the stars, and for the first time in a long time, Garrett felt completely at peace. The wedding was small and simple, held in the village church on a crisp autumn morning. Tom stood as Garrett's witness, and Brennan stood for Kora, beaming with pride. The priest, a kind old man who had known Garrett since he was a boy, performed the ceremony with quiet dignity. There were whispers, of course. Some of the villagers did not approve of a human man marrying an orc woman. But Garrett did not care, and neither did Kora. They spoke their vows clearly and without hesitation, and when the priest pronounced them married, the small gathering cheered. The celebration afterward was held at the farm, with tables set up in the yard and food enough for everyone. The crew came, and some of the neighbors, and even a few people from the village who were willing to look past prejudice for the sake of a good party. Brennan gave a rambling toast about how his sister was the best person he knew and Garrett was lucky to have her, which made everyone laugh. Tom gave a more coherent toast about hard work and good fortune, and then Garrett stood, raising his glass. "I want to thank everyone for being here," he said. "Margaret used to say that life is not about the big moments, it is about the small ones, the daily work, the shared meals, the quiet evenings." She was right, as she usually was. "Kora, you have given me a second chance at those small moments, and I promise to cherish every one of them. To everyone here, thank you for your support, and to my new wife and my new brother, thank you for making this house a home again." He sat down to applause, and Kora kissed him, not caring who was watching. The party went on until the stars came out, and then people began to drift away, offering congratulations and well wishes. Finally, it was just Garrett, Kora, and Brennan, sitting on the porch and watching the last of the guests disappear down the lane. "That was a good day," Brennan said, stifling a yawn. "It was," Kora agreed. "Now get to bed. You have chores in the morning." Brennan groaned but obeyed, trudging inside. Garrett and Kora stayed on the porch, sitting close together, her head on his shoulder. "Are you happy?" Garrett asked. "More than I ever thought I could be," Kora said. "You?" "Same." They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the night sounds of the farm. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called. The breeze rustled through the empty fields, carrying the promise of winter and the quieter months ahead. "I keep waiting for something to go wrong," Kora said quietly. "Like this is all too good to be true. Nothing is going to go wrong. We are going to work hard, take care of each other, and build a life. That is all." "That is all," she echoed, and he could hear the smile in her voice. Winter came, blanketing the farm in snow and driving everyone indoors. Garrett and Kora spent the long evenings planning for the next growing season, poring over ledgers and seed catalogs. Brennan attended the village school and came home with stories about his classes and the friends he was making. On the coldest nights, they all gathered around the fireplace, and Garrett would tell stories about the farm's history, or Kora would teach them orc songs from her childhood. Brennan would draw pictures of the farm and the people on it, getting better with every attempt. One night, Garrett looked around the room at his small family and felt a swell of contentment so strong it almost hurt. Kora caught his eye and smiled, and he knew she felt it too. Spring arrived with a rush of green and birdsong. The fields needed plowing, the livestock needed tending, and there was 100 tasks that required attention. Garrett and Kora worked side by side, and Brennan helped where he could, growing stronger and taller with every passing month. Tom remarked one day that the farm had never looked better. "Having a good partner makes all the difference," Garrett said, glancing at Kora. "I can see that," Tom said, grinning. "You two make a good team." They did. Kora had a knack for organization that complemented Garrett's knowledge of the land, and together they made decisions that improved the farm in ways Garrett had never managed alone. The workers responded well to her, respecting her strength and her fairness. By midsummer, the crops were thriving, and there was talk of expanding into a new field that had lain fallow for years. Garrett and Kora stood at the edge of it one evening, discussing the work it would require. "It is a lot to take on," Kora said. "It is, but I think we can do it if you want to." She looked at him. I want to build something here, something that lasts. Then we will." They walked back to the house hand in hand, and Garrett marveled again at how much his life had changed in a single year. He had gone from being a lonely widower to a husband with a family, from running a farm alone to managing it with a true partner. That night, as they lay in bed, Kora turned to him. "I have been thinking," she said. "About what?" "About the future. About what we are building." She paused. "I want children, with you. Is that something you want?" Garrett felt his heart swell. "Yes, I want that very much." She smiled and kissed him, and they held each other in the darkness, dreaming of the future. The following spring, Kora discovered she was pregnant. She told Garrett one morning before anyone else was awake, pulling him aside in the kitchen. "I am fairly certain," she said, her eyes bright. "I wanted to tell you first." Garrett pulled her into a tight hug, laughing. "That is wonderful. That is amazing. You are happy. I am thrilled." They told Brennan at breakfast, and the boy whooped with joy, then immediately began planning all the things he would teach his future niece or nephew. The pregnancy progressed smoothly. Kora continued working, though Garrett and Brennan both fussed over her constantly, much to her amusement. She finally agreed to lighten her workload in the last few months, spending more time on administrative tasks and less on heavy labor. As autumn turned to winter, the entire farm seemed to be holding its breath, waiting. Garrett found himself alternating between excitement and terror, worrying about everything that could go wrong. Kora, by contrast, was calm. "Women have been doing this since the beginning of time," she reminded him. "I will be fine. I know, I just worry. I know you do. That is one of the reasons I love you." The baby arrived on a clear, cold morning in early winter. The midwife from the village came and took charge, shooing Garrett and Brennan out of the bedroom. They waited downstairs, pacing and fretting, until they heard the unmistakable sound of a baby crying. The midwife appeared at the top of the stairs, smiling. "You have a daughter. Mother and baby are both healthy." Garrett took the stairs 2 at a time and entered the bedroom. Kora was propped up in bed, sweaty and exhausted and radiant, holding a tiny bundle. She looked up as he entered, tears streaming down her face. "Come meet your daughter," she said. Garrett sat carefully on the edge of the bed and looked down at the baby. She was perfect, with a soft fuzz of dark hair and Kora's pointed ears and skin that was a pale green, lighter than her mother's. "She is beautiful," Garrett whispered. "What should we name her?" Kora asked. They had discussed names but never settled on one. Now, looking at his daughter, Garrett knew. "Dahlia," he said. "After the flowers in the field where I asked you to marry me," Kora smiled. "Dahlia, I love it." Brennan was allowed in a few minutes later, and he stared at his niece with wide eyes. "She is so small." "You were small once too," Kora said. "Can I hold her?" Kora showed him how to support the baby's head, and Brennan sat very still, cradling Dahlia like she was made of glass. "Hello," he whispered. "I am your Uncle Brennan. I am going to teach you all kinds of things." Garrett watched them, his heart so full it felt like it might burst. This was his family. His wife, his brother-in-law, his daughter. This was the life he had built from the ashes of his grief. Kora caught his eye and smiled, and he knew she was thinking the same thing. The years that followed were full and busy. Dahlia grew from a baby into a curious toddler who followed her father everywhere, asking endless questions. Brennan grew into a young man, tall and strong, and took on more responsibility on the farm. Kora and Garrett worked side by side, expanding the farm and building a reputation for quality crops and fair dealing. There were challenges, of course. A bad storm one summer that destroyed part of the harvest. A winter so harsh that they lost several animals. Moments of doubt and fear and exhaustion, but there were far more moments of joy. Dahlia's first steps, taken in the field while they were checking the wheat. Brennan's pride when he successfully negotiated a better price for their wool. The quiet evenings on the porch, watching the sun set over the land they had built together. On their 5th anniversary, Garrett and Kora stood in the same field where he had proposed, now lush with growing wheat. Dahlia was chasing butterflies nearby, and Brennan was working with the crew in the next field over. "Can you believe it has been 5 years?" Kora asked. "Some days it feels like 5 minutes. Other days it feels like a lifetime." "I know what you mean." She slipped her hand into his. "Do you ever think about that day I showed up? When I was angry at the wheat and determined to work myself to death? I think about it sometimes. I think about how close I came to never noticing, to letting you just be another worker. What made you notice?" Garrett considered the question. "I saw myself in you, someone using work to run from pain, and I realized I did not want that for either of us. So you decided to interfere. I decided to help. Best decision you ever made." He looked at her, at the life they had built, at their daughter playing in the field. "Without question." She leaned up and kissed him, and he wrapped his arms around her, feeling the solid warmth of her against him. "I love you, Garrett Northam," she said. "I love you too, Kora Northam." Dahlia came running over, demanding to be picked up, and Garrett swung her onto his shoulders. She shrieked with laughter, and Kora laughed too, and the three of them walked back toward the house together. Behind them, the wheat rustled in the breeze, golden and strong, a promise of the harvest to come. The farmhouse stood against the sky, smoke rising from its chimney, windows glowing with light. It was not the life Garrett had imagined when he was younger, or even the life he had thought he would have after Margaret died. But it was a good life. A life full of work and love and the small moments that made everything worthwhile. As they reached the porch, Brennan emerged from the barn, waving. "Dinner ready." "Almost," Kora called back. "Wash up and come inside." They filed into the house, filling it with noise and laughter and the comfortable chaos of family. Garrett set Dahlia in her chair at the table while Kora brought out bowls of stew and fresh bread. As they sat down to eat, Garrett looked around the table at the faces he loved, and he felt a deep sense of gratitude for the farm that had been in his family for generations, for the work that filled his days, for the people who filled his heart. After dinner, when Dahlia was in bed and Brennan was reading by the fire, Garrett and Kora stepped out onto the porch. The night was clear and cool, the stars bright overhead. "It is funny," Kora said. "I came here thinking I just needed to earn money to save Brennan. I never imagined I would find a home, a husband, a family. I came into the field that first day thinking I just needed to make sure a new worker was not going to collapse from overwork. I never imagined I would find a partner, a wife, a reason to keep going. We were both wrong then. In the best possible way." They stood together, watching the stars, and Garrett thought about all the choices that had led to this moment. His decision to speak to Kora that first day, her decision to trust him, their decision to help Brennan, to stay together, to build a life. Every choice had mattered, every choice had brought them here. "What are you thinking?" Kora asked. "That I am grateful for all of this, for you." "I am grateful too." She squeezed his hand. "For the strange farmer who saw me drowning in work and threw me a line. For the stubborn orc woman who grabbed it." They smiled at each other, and then Kora yawned. "Bed," she suggested. "Bed," Garrett agreed. They went inside, checked on Dahlia one last time, and climbed the stairs to their room. As they lay down together, Kora curled against Garrett's side, her head on his chest. "Garrett," she murmured, already half asleep. Thank you for everything." "Thank you." She was asleep within moments, her breathing deep and even. Garrett lay awake a little longer, listening to the sounds of the house settling around them. The creak of old wood, the soft whisper of wind through the eaves, the gentle rhythm of his wife's breathing. This was his life now. Not perfect, but real. Not easy, but worthwhile. Built on work and trust, and the decision, made every day, to choose each other. He closed his eyes and let sleep take him, knowing that when he woke, there would be work to do and people to love and a future to build. And knowing that he would face it all with Kora by his side, just as they had faced everything else, together. The seasons continued their endless cycle, and the farm thrived under their joint stewardship. By the time Dahlia was 3, Kora was pregnant again. This time it was a boy, who they named Bryce, and he had his father's brown hair and his mother's green skin, and a set of lungs that could wake the entire household. Brennan, now 16, had become indispensable to the farm's operation. He had his sister's work ethic and a good head for numbers, and Garrett had begun training him to eventually take over the day-to-day management. "You are going to make a fine farmer," Garrett told him one day as they repaired a fence. Brennan grinned. "Learned from the best." "Your sister taught you well. I meant you, both of you." As the years passed, the farm became known throughout the region not just for its crops, but for the family that ran it. The human man and his orc wife, people said, who had built something remarkable together, who proved that prejudice was just ignorance, and that love could bridge any divide. Garrett and Kora did not set out to prove anything to anyone. They simply lived their lives, raised their children, and worked their land. But in doing so, they became an example to others who might have thought such a life was impossible. On their 10th anniversary, the entire village came to the farm for a celebration. There was food and music and dancing, and even some of the people who had been skeptical at first came to offer their congratulations. As the party wound down and the stars came out, Garrett and Kora found themselves alone by the field again, in the spot that had become special to them. 10 years, Kora said wonderingly. It has gone so fast, and so slow, in a good way. I know what you mean, she leaned against him. Thank you for saving my brother, for saving me. You saved me too. I was drowning when you showed up, I just did not know it. Then I suppose we saved each other. I suppose we did. They stood in silence for a while, comfortable and content. Around them the farm buzzed with the quiet sounds of a summer night. Crickets singing, the distant lowing of cattle, the whisper of wind through wheat. This was home. This was family. This was everything they had worked for and everything they would continue to build one day at a time, for as long as they both lived. Garrett looked at his wife, silhouetted against the stars, and felt a surge of love so strong it took his breath away. She turned and smiled at him, reading his expression easily after all these years. I love you, she said. I love you too. Always. They walked back to the house hand in hand, past the fields they had planted, past the barn they had rebuilt, past the garden Kora had expanded year after year. They climbed the porch steps, walked through the door, and closed it behind them, shutting out the night and enclosing themselves in the warm, busy comfort of their home. Inside, Dahlia and Bryce were supposed to be asleep but were giggling in their room. Brennan was finishing up some paperwork at the kitchen table. The house smelled of wood smoke and baking bread, and all the sense of a life well lived. Garrett and Kora said good night to Brennan and checked on the children, tucking them in properly and kissing their foreheads. Then they climbed the stairs to their own room and prepared for bed. As they lay together in the darkness, Kora said quietly, Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I had not come to your farm that day? Sometimes, but not often. Why not? Because it did not happen that way. You did come to my farm, and everything that followed was exactly as it should have been. You really believe that? I do. Do you? She was quiet for a moment, considering. Then she said, Yes, I think I do. It feels like fate, does it not? Like we were always meant to find each other. Maybe we were. I like that idea. So do I. They fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms, dreaming of fields and harvests and the future stretching bright and endless before them. Outside, the moon rose over the farm, painting everything in silver light, and the world turned on, peaceful and quiet. The years continued to pass. Dahlia grew into a bright, curious girl who loved books and animals equally. Bryce became a sturdy, cheerful boy who followed his father everywhere. Brennan fell in love with a girl from the village, a weaver's daughter with kind eyes and a quick laugh, and they married in the same church where Garrett and Kora had wed. The farm expanded further, taking on more workers and more land. Garrett and Kora remained at its heart, making decisions together, working together, living together in a partnership that only grew stronger with time. There were sorrows, of course. Garrett's father's old dog died, and they buried him in the apple orchard. One hard winter, they lost a third of their livestock and had to rebuild the herd. Kora's tusks ached sometimes in cold weather, a reminder of old injuries. But the joys far outweighed the sorrows. First steps and first words, successful harvests and good seasons. quiet moments on the porch and loud, chaotic family dinners. The steady accumulation of a life well lived. On their 20th anniversary, Garrett and Kora took a rare day away from the farm, riding out to a nearby lake where they had never been. They packed a picnic and spent the day swimming and talking and simply being together, away from the demands of the farm and the children. As the sun set, they sat on the shore, watching the light turn the water to gold. 20 years, Garrett said. How did we get so old? Kora laughed. Speak for yourself. I am still young. Of course you are. I am the ancient one. You are not ancient, just well-seasoned. He grinned and kissed her temple. I will take it. They sat in comfortable silence, and then Kora said, I have been thinking about something. What is that? About when we are gone, about what we are leaving behind. Garrett looked at her. That is morbid. It is practical. We have built something here, Garrett, something worth preserving. I want to make sure it continues after we are gone. It will. Brennan is already running half the farm, and Dahlia is showing interest too. Even Bryce, when he stops chasing chickens long enough to pay attention. It will continue. I know. But I want to make sure they understand why we built it. Not just the what or the how, but the why. Then we will tell them. We will make sure they know. Promise. Promise. They rode back to the farm as the stars came out, arriving just in time to tuck the younger children into bed. Dahlia and Bryce demanded stories, and Garrett told them about the early days of the farm, when it was just him and his father working the fields. Kora added her own stories about growing up in an orc village far to the east, before her parents died. The children listened with wide eyes, soaking up every word. When they finally fell asleep, Garrett and Kora tiptoed out and went to their own room. They will remember, Kora said as they prepared for bed. When they are grown, they will remember these stories. I hope so. They will. And they will tell their own children, and the farm will continue generation after generation. Garrett pulled her close. I like that idea. I thought you might. They lay down together, and Garrett listened to the sounds of the house around them, the creak of the old wood, the soft breathing of the children in their rooms, the distant sounds of the farm settling down for the night. This was what he had built. Not just a farm, but a legacy. Not just a house, but a home. Not just a life, but a family that would continue long after he was gone. It was more than he had ever dreamed of, back when he was a lonely widower staring at empty fields. More than he had imagined possible when Kora first showed up, angry at the wheat and determined to work herself to death. But here it was, real and solid and good. He closed his eyes and let himself drift toward sleep, Kora warm and solid beside him, and thought that if he never did another thing, this would be enough. This would be more than enough. This would be everything. The farm continued to prosper through the years that followed. The children grew and learned, and eventually began to make their own marks on the place. Dahlia took over management of the livestock, showing a natural gift for animal husbandry. Bryce, to everyone's surprise, developed a passion for crop rotation and soil management, turning what had always been instinct and tradition into something approaching science. Brennan and his wife had children of their own, 3 boys who ran wild through the fields and learned farming the same way Brennan had, through work and observation and patient teaching. Garrett and Kora grew older together, their hair turning gray, their movements a little slower, but their partnership as strong as ever. They still took walks through the fields in the evening. They still sat on the porch and watched the sunset. They still fell asleep in each other's arms every night, on a warm spring morning when Garrett was 58 and Kora was 52. They stood in the field where they had first talked about her brother, all those years ago. The wheat was just starting to green up, tiny shoots pushing through the dark earth. Remember when you told me you could not pay me back, Garrett said. Kora smiled. I remember you said you were not asking me to. I was not, and I never did, but you did anyway. How so? You gave me a life, a family, a reason to keep going that is worth more than any amount of silver. She took his hand. You gave me the same thing, you and this farm. You gave me a home when I had none. You gave Brennan a future. You gave me love when I thought I would never have it. Then I suppose we are even. I suppose we are. They walked back to the house together, moving a little slower than they once had, but still side by side, still together. That evening, after dinner, Garrett called the family together in the living room. Dahlia and Bryce came, along with Brennan and his wife and their 3 boys. They filled the room, talking and laughing, and Garrett had to call for quiet twice before everyone settled down. I wanted to gather everyone together, because your mother and I have been talking, Garrett began. We are not getting any younger, and we want to make sure some things are settled. Father, you are not that old, Dahlia protested. I am old enough. Now listen. He took a breath. This farm has been in my family for 3 generations, and I intend for it to stay in the family for many more. When your mother and I are gone, it will pass to all of you equally. Brennan, Dahlia, Bryce, you will share it and run it together the way your mother and I have run it. But we need you to understand something, Kora added. This farm is not just land and crops. It is a legacy. It represents the idea that people from different places, different backgrounds can come together and build something good, something lasting. We want you to remember that. We want you to pass it on to your own children. There was a long silence, and then Brennan spoke up. We will, he said quietly. We promise. The others nodded, and Garrett felt a weight lift from his shoulders. Good, he said. That is all I needed to hear. The family dispersed slowly, the children heading to bed and the adults lingering to talk. Eventually, it was just Garrett and Kora again, sitting in front of the fireplace. That went well, Kora said. It did. Do you think they really understand? I think they are beginning to. They will understand fully when they are older. When they have their own families and their own struggles, then they will look back and see what we were trying to tell them. I hope so. Garrett pulled her close, and they sat together watching the fire burn down to embers. Outside, the farm was quiet under the stars, fields dark and still, waiting for the spring to truly arrive and the cycle to begin again. This was the rhythm of their lives now. Work and rest, planting and harvest, the slow turn of seasons and the steady accumulation of years. It was not dramatic. It was not exciting. But it was real, and it was theirs, and it was exactly what they had both needed. As the fire died to coals, they climbed the stairs to bed, their hands linked the way they had been linked for more than 20 years. They lay down together, and Kora rested her head on Garrett's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. Garrett, she murmured. Yes, I am glad I came to your farm that day. He kissed the top of her head. So am I. Even though I was terrible and angry and determined to push everyone away, especially because of that, it meant I got to be the one who convinced you to stay. She smiled against his chest. You are a good man, Garrett Northam. Only because I have a good woman beside me. They fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other, surrounded by the life they had built together. The house creaked and settled around them. The farm breathed in the darkness, alive and waiting. And in the morning, when the sun rose, they would wake and begin again the way they had every day for more than 2 decades, together, always together. And that, Garrett thought as sleep took him, was all he had ever really wanted, someone to work beside, someone to love. Someone to build a life with, one day and one moment at a time. He had found that in Kora. She had found it in him. And everything else, all the success and prosperity and family, had flowed from that simple, essential partnership. The stars wheeled overhead. The world turned. And in the farmhouse in the borderlands, A man and woman slept peacefully, their lives full and their hearts content, knowing that what they had built would endure long after they were gone. It was enough. It was everything. It was home.